Prime Minister, thanks for your time here in Peru.
Good to be here.
You came to this APEC summit with a few important messages. Stick with free trade, continue taking action on climate change, and don't retreat into isolation. How much of this message is aimed at the man who's not here, Donald Trump?
No, it's squarely aimed at one thing, David, and that's Australia's national interest. We're a trading nation, and I support free and fair trade. 1 in 4 Australian jobs depends on trade. We have 75% of our trade occurs with APEC nations, and it's important to do that. In addition to that, of course, climate change is something that we have to deal with. It's in Australia's national interest, and I see climate change as not just a challenge, which it is, but it's also an opportunity, and a particular opportunity for Australia.
And I want to come to that, but you can see how it looks like Donald Trump's just won. He's saying he's going to abandon action on climate change. He's going to put up all these tariff barriers. And you've come here to say, hang on, we need to stick with these things.
So has all of the 21 economies which are represented here, because APEC was an organisation where Bob Hawke and Paul Keating played a critical role 35 years ago.
About trade.
The first APEC summit.
So this is not some strategic autonomy, as a new shift to strategic autonomy, as China's state-run media have said.
This is consistent with Australia's position as it's been under the former Labor government of Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, and Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, under most of the coalition as well, it must be said.
Nonetheless, are you worried?
We're a trading nation. We benefit from it, and it is about Australian jobs.
Are you worried then about the prospect of a trade war, given what Donald Trump is promising?
We'll continue to advocate for free and fair trade. Donald Trump will take office on January 20. I'm not going to preempt what his administration might do. He clearly has an agenda. We'll wait and see how that plays out.
Is there a role Australia could play as an ally of the US, a great trading partner of China, to lower the temperature on trade?
Well, the role that Australia can play is to be a strong and consistent advocate for markets, for free and fair trade, for jobs to be created. Trade has not just benefited the industrialised nations like Australia to be able to export our resources, export manufactured goods, export services such as education. It's also lifted up in this region, literally, tens of millions of people out of poverty.
Did you ask Donald Trump in your phone call to give Australia an exemption from any new tariffs?
No, I pointed out, though, to President Trump that the United States has a trade surplus with Australia. It's had that trade surplus since Truman was president. So both the United States and Australia benefit from the trade between our two countries.
Would it be a perfect relationship, as he called it, if he slapped tariffs on Australia?
Well, he said we're going to have a perfect friendship. And I'm very confident that the relationship with the United States will stay strong.
And no tariffs?
It was under, well, I'm very confident we will put forward Australia's national interest.
You're confident we'll get an exemption?
Well, I don't want to preempt those decisions, but we'll advocate for Australia's national interest. That's my job to do so, because 1 in 4 of jobs in Australia is trade dependent. And that's why we benefit from it. And many of those jobs, of course, are high-value jobs as well.
Okay, on climate change, as you've been arguing here, the world should continue towards net zero. Your British counterpart, Keir Starmer, is clearly undeterred by Donald Trump planning to pull out of the Paris Agreement. He's announced the 2035 target for the UK, an ambitious one, 81% lower emissions. Can you reach that level of ambition?
Well, I'll leave each nation state to do their NDC and to put forward their targets. We've got a target that we introduced when we came into office.
That was the 2030 target. Yeah, but you've got to do the 2035 target next.
No, Keir Starmer has come into office and has come up with a new target for a new government.
Under the Paris Agreement, you have to have a 2035 target next year, right?
Yeah, sometime next year.
Before the election?
Well, our focus is on achieving the 2030 target, because 2030 comes before 2035.
But don't we deserve to know, before we go to the polls, what you're planning to do?
You do know exactly what we're doing. 43% by 2030.
But for 2035?
A target of net zero by 2050. 82% renewables by 2030. You have a whole mechanism. You not only know what we're going to do, you know how we're going to get there through the safeguard mechanism in particular, as well as through the capacity investment scheme that's been particularly successful. So we've got a model for what we will do, which is renewables backed by gas, and you've got how we're going to get there, which is using market-based mechanisms.
But investors need the target, don't they? I mean, they're looking around the world, they'll be looking at the UK, they'll be looking at Australia.
And they have a target, David, from us. What they don't have is an alternative government with any policy besides something in the distance to the 2040s that will produce 4% of Australia's energy needs under their nuclear plan. They don't have costings for it. They don't have any plan for what will happen in between 2025 and the 2040s.
Let's stick with your plans. You've been making the point here that if the US under Donald Trump gets rid of the Inflation Reduction Act and the big incentives for green investment in the US, Australia might be able to pick up some opportunities. Is that realistic? What sort of investments might we get?
Well, there's first mover advantage, of course. And so when there is a change, sometimes an opportunity comes as well. And one of the things we've seen is considerable capital flow to the United States as a direct result of the policies that have been in place. Now, if those policies change, then obviously the economics change of investment and incentives and attractiveness.
But we're not going to pick up electric vehicle manufacturing, for example. What would we pick up?
Well, I'm not preempting all of that. I'm not getting ahead of where the Trump administration might go, but they've said there'll be changes. And I've just made the point that where there's changes, there's also the potential for opportunity.
Well, you're not the only one looking at opportunities. Singapore, Malaysia, they're working on a special economic zone to entice manufacturing there as well. Would you consider topping up the incentives given what's happening, given this changing landscape?
Well, we're going to have announcements in the lead up to the election next year and beyond.
So you might have further incentives?
What we'll do, well, we already have considerable incentives there through the mechanisms that we have in place, but also through investment schemes such as for industry policy, including the National Reconstruction Fund. I can indicate that the first approvals from the National Reconstruction Fund have been agreed to. Those announcements will start to roll out from the coming week. What that's about is identifying the opportunity that's there in everything from defence to agriculture to new technology, IT, to all of these areas, the benefits that we can have to make more things in Australia.
There'll be more to come before the election.
Well, we have legislation before the Parliament as well for a future made in Australia.
Okay.
And my vision is for cheaper, cleaner energy, powering, advanced manufacturing, and there's nowhere. One of the discussions that I'm always uplifted by when I come to conferences like this. I had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Singapore earlier today, Lawrence Wong. One of the things that Singapore doesn't have is space. Now, the opportunity that's there for us to use the best solar resources in the world to have solar panels producing power, not just for Australia domestically, but potentially exporting that power as well, is enormous.
Now, just on Donald Trump, his cabinet picks that we've seen over the past week have been raising, well, a lot of criticism, including from some Republicans. One in particular that matters to Australia is his pick for Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, a veteran, a Fox News host. Had you even heard of Pete Hegseth before he announced him?
Well, I'd heard of him, but those decisions are, of course, a matter for Donald Trump. They're not something that Australia interferes with. We respect whatever decisions are made. And my job and the job of all of our ministers is to work with their respective colleagues, and I'm very confident that we'll be able to do that.
But I guess this goes to whether Australia has many connections with this new crew of loyalists around Donald Trump that he's selecting. I know there was an anticipation Mike Pompeo would be there and there were efforts made to talk to him, but has anyone spoken to this selection for Defence Secretary?
Well, we've made efforts across the board. When I was in the United States for my state visit last year, take for example, I was the first meeting that Speaker Johnson had after his election as Speaker of the Congress, the third most powerful position in the United States system.
But a lot's changed since then.
I think Speaker Johnson, you'll find, will have considerable influence. And I met with over 100 Democrats and Republicans from the Congress, from the Senate, and we have been working very hard to make sure that we have links across the political spectrum, as you'd expect.
Are you willing to put more money in to the US system, into their industrial base, to get AUKUS locked in under Donald Trump?
We have an agreement that has received overwhelming support in the Congress and the Senate.
But we don't know whether Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth are on board.
Well, we have a substantial agreement across the board, and there is nothing but positive statements has come out of the US system for a long period of time. Remember this, David, that there was all this speculation that AUKUS wouldn't be agreed to. We've got Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 agreed to, legislated in the United States, legislated in Australia.
All right, so finally that brings me to Kevin Rudd as ambassador and the attention that's been on his previous descriptions of Donald Trump as a village idiot, amongst other things. Look, others who've criticised Trump in the past, including J.D. Vance, had to make very public mea culpas. J.D. Vance said it's very important to admit you're wrong. Do you think Kevin Rudd might have to make some sort of public mea culpa, or would that be simply too demeaning for an Australian ambassador?
Well, look, we're focused on the future, and I'm sure President Trump will be as well. And that is the important thing. Kevin Rudd has been doing a terrific job.
So you don't want him to apologise?
Well, Kevin Rudd's been doing a terrific job as ambassador. And all of the comments that have been raised prior to his appointment, and Ambassador Rudd has been working with people across the political spectrum. He attended both the Republican and the Democrat national conventions and engaged with people across the board. I know that he was in regular contact with the head of the Republican campaign committee as well as the Democrats. And
so he'll stay?
That's what we'd expect.
He'll stay no matter what?
Yeah, he's Australia's appointment, and it says something about the importance of the United States that we have appointed a former Prime Minister. That's a sign of how seriously we take this relationship, which is a relationship between our peoples based upon our common values.
Prime Minister, we'll see you at the G20 in Brazil. Thanks for joining us.
You will. Thanks, David.